Hi, I'm Mio Stevens-Gandara, Assistant Professor of Photography and current organizer for cultural events at Rio Hondo College. The Cultural Events program at Rio Hondo College presents a diverse selection of arts and entertainment free of charge for our community. Rio Hondo's Cultural Events program showcases the visual and performing arts work of students and faculty, as well as regional, national, and international artists. We continue with our programming that focuses on 3 categories: honoring ancestors, preserving culture for future generations, and youth and community empowerment. If we should face any technical difficulties this afternoon, please be patient. We will work it out. If you have questions, please post them and we will answer at the end of the talk. We are pleased to welcome Dalila Paola Mendez. Dalila Paola Mendez is a first-generation queer Central American artist based in Los Angeles. Through painting, printmaking, photography, and murals, she visually narrates stories of resilience, elders, matriarchs, LGBTQ, and the environment. In this workshop, we will create a kite exploring stories of resilience, courage, and ancestry using maps and images exploring migration, memory, and geographies. Looking at the cultural practices of Mayan communities in Guatemala who create kites to honor their ancestors and family members who have passed. Welcome, Dalila.
Hi, Mio. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here and be in this space. And I just want to take the time to acknowledge the Tongva people and the elements and the ancestors here of this land. Yeah, just a little bit about myself. I think that my work really is born from my matriarch family line. My grandmother comes from El Salvador. So if you go to the next slide, there you go. So this is my, I'll show you a breadth of my work, but this picture kind of embellishes like what really is at the heart of my work. I think being a first generation immigrant here in the United States, the power of my grandmother and the resiliency of her migrating from El Salvador to Guatemala and then to New Orleans and then Los Angeles has really informed my work and was really examining belonging and different traditions, because at points where you don't feel like you're from here and you're not from the homeland, there's this like in between, and especially growing up in a very diverse area of Los Angeles. And then my other family background has really allowed me to explore these themes. So if you go to the next slide. Here again, this is a photo from Guatemala and Chichicastenango on the steps of a really beautiful Mayan church that's in the center of the town. And I thought this photo was really great to show the line, the generations of women, because I was raised by my grandmother, my aunt, and my mom. This is always something very, very important for me to share and to show that brown is beautiful, that indigenous people are beautiful. And so it's the way that I can capture and share that. If we can go to the next slide. So again, here, ancestral knowledge. You know, there's a lot of things that we've lost being a colonized people, as well as being from indigenous lands where a lot of our indigenous folks have been massacred and there has been pretty big genocide of our people. So for me, it's always important to remember the ancestral knowledge that I have, but then also learning more about it and then sharing it with younger generations. You can go to the next slide. And so for my family, nature and plant medicine has been very, very important. I'm very grateful for my grandmother imparting that knowledge to me. And so I think living in an urban landscape, there is always nature around us. We don't have it as much as if we lived in like, you know, a rural area, but being in urban spaces, it's important to me to show the resiliency of our elements and of nature. If you can go to the next slide. This is a painting I did titled Escondida. And again, just showing, you know, the playfulness of a woman in a pueblo that I visited when visiting family. Next slide. This is a piece I did, LA Reimagined. And this is really inspired by the artesanía from Latin America, but especially in Central America. And I just kind of wanted to show that, like, the Central American identity of folks that live here in Los Angeles, but also showing how important nature is to our cultures and to our cities. Like, we need more green spaces. So it was really about highlighting these green spaces within these urban environments. And so my work really always includes elements, so fire, water, air, and earth. And so this one incorporates the LA River, and then kind of juxtaposed with the modernization of, like, buildings, and this way that we're constantly have this duality of nature trying to live amongst city folks in urban environments. If we go to the next slide. This piece is titled Food Justice. And again, I hear him celebrating Black is Beautiful, the legacy of social justice work, especially of Black folks within Oakland, the Black Panther Party, and how they really were the creators of the free breakfast program. And at that time, it was like a national security threat to this US government that free food was given to communities of color. They also would hand out groceries and really, like, made a difference within their communities so that the communities could survive and be sustainable. And yet that happened in the 60s. And here today, we're still dealing with many of the same issues. And so on the bag, I put Black Lives Matter, and really our survival is about liberation. And so I also take in ancient symbols from different cultures and incorporate that into my pieces, which decorate the women's dresses. Next slide. Diosas Enamoradas is a piece that I did celebrating queer love. Being a first generation queer person in my family was not an easy task to come out. And so, and a lot of times it's seen as not a positive thing. And so I really wanted to celebrate the spiritual aspect of love, of, you know, how generative it is, how liberating it is to be oneself, to be free, and to also explore the spirituality aspect. And so this is looking at modern, like, ancient symbols and kind of putting it more into a different context for myself. So at the bottom, there are the different phases of the moon. You have the lotus symbol, which really is about, you know, coming to one's consciousness, celebrating life, and blessing this love between a queer couple. If you could go to the next slide. This is a mural that I did in Boyle Heights at Mi Centro. And this really was a collaborative effort with youth from around LA, but really specifically youth of color, to examine and to really look at what they would like to represent in a mural that they could show to community. And so as I was working with the youth, one of the big issues were most of them were first generation students here in Los Angeles. And so they wanted to shed light on the many immigrants who pass trying to cross the border and who really come here to create a better life. And so the woman is holding a book basically of, like, creation stories of the stories of our communities and giving the blessing. And so the blessing that's coming out of the copalero is butterflies who then are holding the spirits of those who have passed. And then the reina, the woman that's in the middle, is a trans woman who's, like, giving her blessings and celebrating her regalness through the maguey, which is a very important plant, both in spiritual practice, but also as a cultural food and a medicine within community. And so she's coming out of this plant. And then in the background is the different neighborhoods of the city, different landmarks within Los Angeles, and then really celebrating the history of activism within the city, especially in Boyle Heights in East LA, and the continual struggle that youth and people are having to do to this day. So really celebrating activism and celebrating the need for liberation and rights to be acknowledged of people. So if we can go to the next slide. So We Are Resilient is my most recent piece. This piece is a multimedia piece, and it's really looking at this time that we're living in with the pandemic of COVID affecting us, the many lives that were lost during this time, like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Andres Guardado, the people who have been killed to police brutality. Also the incarceration of our communities and our youth. But also, again, incorporating ancient symbols as the way that we can keep our inspiration, we can keep the hope alive, we can continue to the journey of trying to bring rights and justice for people. And it's also a piece that it's been really challenging. So during this time for a lot of people. So it was kind of like we are resilient because we continue to live. Our ancestors are behind us. They are celebrating our lives, and we have to continue the fight of, creating a better society for everybody. Next slide. So this now will be a breath of my printmaking. This was the first print I did with self-help graphics. And this piece was for an atelier that was looking at weaving as a way of storytelling. And so I created a huipil. So this is a traditional woven blouse that is done in Latin America. Specifically, this one is inspired by Guatemala and El Salvador. And a lot of times the symbols that are incorporated onto these huipiles are, they can be creation stories. They also talk about family stories within different towns because the huipiles differ depending on what region you are in. And so because being first generation, having gone through, my grandmother also unfortunately having to leave her traditional indigenous ways. And sometimes that information and those teachings are lost. And so I don't know how to weave, but this was the way that I could create my huipil for this time. And so the top part is really about our spiritual consciousness, coming into consciousness. So there's the Hunapku, which is like the yin and yang, the duality of life, where everything begins and ends. There's no beginning and no ending. There's the Om symbol that is represents like consciousness and the universe and the vibrations of connecting to our higher self. And then the lotus flower. The lotus flower is pretty, is a recurring theme in my work. The lotus flower does represent coming into consciousness, but within that, it's like from the darkness of the mud and below the water, it can come out into the light to find and bloom to its full glory. And then you have the middle part, which is flowers. And then there are these really round symbols there that are the Middle Eastern evil eye amulet that protect us from whether it's like mal ojo, the bad eye, or somebody giving you bad eye, or just evil spirits. And that flanks these things that are happening within our world right now that I feel are really causing a lot of destruction. So it talks about global warming, offshore drilling, gun violence, genetically modified organisms. Nike was symbolizes child labor, slave labor. We have processed foods, so we're a lot of times not eating whole foods. Instead, we're eating fast food that isn't nutritious and is causing a lot of illness within our communities. There's deforestation, drones and wars, and then also like our world that has become so much about Wi-Fi and like gaming and things that I feel like disconnect us to the natural environments and to people. So, and then below that, in writing coming out of the jaguar's mouth is it says love in Arabic and peace in Farsi. And the jaguar is a warrior spirit. And the reason I used Middle Eastern writing is because my stepfather is Armenian Arab. And so I also grew up with that culture. So there are all these different cultures that are in my family that I show that there's a commonality between all of our cultures, especially in our indigenous practices. They are always looking at the cardinal elements, connection to land, to the plants, to the two-legged, the four-legged, and the winged. Like, so there's all these things that connect us to the earth. And so that bottom layer is looking at the ways that we can connect better with people, maybe unplug from social media so we could read a book. The butterfly represents our metamorphosis of coming and becoming better people, growing, reflecting. A bike to help with, climate change. And then the boombox. I'm an 80s kid, and so very much had boomboxes all the time. And so music is something that connects us all and is really inspiring for the soul. And then the bottom layer are birds and nature symbols that are about grounding and connecting us. If we can go to the next slide. This is another print I did at Self-Help Graphics. And this one's titled QUEERIOS. And QUEERIOS is about celebrating queer love. It says on the top, it says fabulousness guaranteed. And because I think I had a hard time coming out and my family wasn't accepting when I came out, for me, it's really about loving who you are. It had to become a point where I could no longer silence myself, and I had to celebrate who I was, even if my family was going to disown me, which I thought they would, but they didn't. But still was very challenging. They weren't accepting. It took many years for that process to happen. But this is like kind of playing with like pop culture. Like we ate Cheerios. I ate Cheerios as a kid. So let me switch it up and do QUEERIOS. And like you get a great bite of fabulousness as you eat QUEERIOS. So I thought it was fun and playful and really celebrating our queer culture. And go to the next slide. Corazón de la Tierra. So this is this is the element of land. So I did this. This is my first woodblock print I did. And I made this for a trip, a printmakers exchange in Cuba. It was a US-Cuban printmakers exchange. And so on the female body, again, celebrating the divinity of the woman's body. And I think for me, this piece is really important because being a woman, we're always having, not always, but a lot of times, we are being subjected to violence, whether it's men accosting us or we have trauma as kids growing up, as young girls or boys. But, I think a lot of times women are going through these things and we get sexualized very young. And so for me, a lot of times there was a lot of fear around my body. And so this piece was really about celebrating the body, the beauty of our body. Also, as a female, like as women, we have the option to give birth, and the Mother Earth gives birth to all the elements and things that we have here on the earth. So it's the synonymous of that, of being a goddess, being divine, and what we birth into life as individuals and as the environment. And so on her body is the womb, and it's a symbol for a cave, which I feel it's like going into the depths of oneself. And so there's a map which includes Mexico, Central America, parts of South America, and then the Caribbean. And I added the Caribbean because it's also part of Latin America. I was going to Cuba and looking at the indigenous practices there. And so the Taino people of Cuba, when they were gardening, they were a very agricultural society. Part of their practice was creating like the first invention of a shovel, but they used a stick, and they would carve their sticks, these really long poles, to dig into the soil, and they would carve them as snakes. And the snake a lot of times is used in yoga, coming like once the snake has arisen, has uncoiled, it's coming into consciousness. For them, the snake represented when you dug into the earth, it was like you were inviting the earth to connect with the heavens. You were opening up a portal. At the same time, you're giving life by planting a seed. And so around her neck is where the snake is. And then coming off of the collar is the celestial beings of the cosmos. So we are connected to the universe and the cosmos because that guided a lot of, and still guides us with cosmology and the stars. The Milky Way was a way that people navigated, or the North Star when they were out into the ocean. The Milky Way is also in Mayan culture, basically the path to, in Mexico they say Mitlan, or down into the spirit world. And so I incorporated that into there. And then the Quetzal birds are giving the blessing. And so they're at the top. They're giving their blessing to this like interconnectedness between all the elements. And then the heart is really about the heartbeat, the drum of our souls and spirits, to be resilient, to continue, and to survive. I mean, our ancestors passed, but we're still living. So it's an amazing feat that we're still here and surviving to this day. So you can go to the next slide. This one's Corazón del Agua, and this is the water element. And this one was for an atelier that I curated, inviting 5 other queer women artists. And this one is celebrating, again, the divinity of the feminine, but really celebrating queer love. And again, the lotus is there on the symbols on her, basically like her rebozo that's around her arms, represent coming into oneself, represent the feminine, like the yoni, and then also the universe, so connecting. And then for me, I think water really here is water is life. We've heard that if we don't have water, we can't live longer than 7 days, but also it gives life to everything on this planet, and allows us to live here. And so, and I think we're really at a time where our water is being polluted, and our earth isn't being taken care of. And so it affects us all. So in that, it's about celebrating this, like the beauty. We also are made from water. So this was really important for me to talk about that, and the way that queer love and love is a spiritual process, and coming to oneself is a very deeper connection to ourselves. So you can go to the next slide. Barriletes. So our barriletes, our practice in Guatemala, in the highlands of Guatemala, is done during the time of Day of the Dead, which is known here. It's also called All Saints Day. And this practice is really about the air element. And so this practice is centuries old. And it first also began with children, because when people would go to the grave sites to decorate, to clean the grave sites in the cemeteries, a lot of the parents, like, they bring aguardiente or like liquor or food, and they celebrate the person's life. And a lot of times the kids get bored. And so it was a way that they could also participate in this process. They used kites for the children to like connect with their spirits and their ancestors, but in a way that was for kids to be able to participate in and still learn this tradition and this practice. And so that's where it was like began to put kites at their grave sites, and also for children to play. And then as time had passed, which is like a lot of these are living traditions, right? So they change as time goes on. And in Guatemala, in the 80s, there was a civil war. I mean, there's been a while that there's a genocide that's been happening in Guatemala, but specifically during the Civil War, communities, friends, and families started to create kites that talked about family members who were dying during the wartime, but also talking about how modernization was killing the things that are so important to the life of indigenous people, the land, being able to plant, the water, fire, all these things. So a lot of the barriletes started to incorporate social political issues and really looks at the ways that so many different ways of expressing their creativity, and also being resisting to what was happening with the government. And so there's very elaborate kites that happen. There's also smaller kites that are done in geometric shapes. So a lot of these practices are ephemeral. So they make these kites, they spend like 2 weeks, they spend a lot of time to create these kites, and they're flown for the day, and then they're burnt after. And so most of the time they're using bamboo and tissue paper to create these kites. And it's really amazing. Some can be about 55 feet in diameter. If we go to the next slide, I kind of have passed it, but here it says, it's basically what I've just recently said, but it's also, yeah, I guess I just said it all that's on this slide. So yeah, social issues, geometric shapes, different sizes. And it's a really beautiful way for community to come together. The side of this, I haven't seen it personally, but I have seen pictures, and it's really amazing. And a lot of my friends who are from Guatemala have shared with me their photographs and the practice, and it's just really amazing. So for me, it was really important to incorporate this as a part of a practice of honoring ancestors and to the wind. And so I started to create some kites that deal with migration stories and how we travel and we move, but that lineage that we carry within our bodies. If we can go to the next slide. So some of the colors and meanings behind the tissue paper and the colors that are used in the kites are as follows. Like red is the east direction. It represents the element of fire, energy, clarification, and protection. Black represents the west direction, and it's the element of earth. It represents strong, being powerful, cutting negative energy. White is the north direction, represents air, and it's purification, health, tranquility, vision, and perception. Yellow is the south direction, and it's the element of water, represents energy of life, health, protection, strength and force of life. Green represents hope, opportunities, success, abundance, and nature. Turquoise is about centering. Light blue is mind, dreams, hope, attracting money, happiness, and traveling. Blue is fortune. Purple is healing, cleansing, and opening paths. And then pink is sublime and love and tranquility. So those are some of the colors that if you want to make those meanings, you can use those. And this is in the Mayan culture what they represent. If we can go to the next slide. So here, these are the supplies that we'll be using. I'm going to use balsa wood that I got like from Blick, but you could use sticks. Some people use, if you want to do it with children, you could use straws and connect straws to make, 4 equal size straws so that you could use that. You could use 4 straws as you could use 3 straws if you want. You can make different, like you can make a hexagon, an octagon. Sometimes also you can make free forms. So it's almost like a kite sculpture. So it's really infinite, the possibilities of what you can do. And that's the exciting part of it, is that it's being creative during this time. So we'll use string, glue, tissue paper, a ruler, scissors, or an Exacto knife. And then also if you want to incorporate, so a lot of the barriletes in Guatemala, they use tissue paper to create the scenes or to create the imagery. In my pieces, I'm using photographs, I'm using maps, I use color copies of my artwork that I've done to add to the kites. You can use the tissue paper also to make like geometric shapes to make designs on the actual kite. So if we go to the next slide. So here we'll be making a barrilete. Here's another example. These are more geometric shapes. And these are showing kind of smaller kites that have been made. So if we can, I'll show you now how to demonstrate how to make a kite. And I will show you the steps to that process. So what we'll do first of all is we'll take these sticks. And we'll measure. This one's 24 inches. And we will measure at the half point at 12. And I'm going to use a total of 4 sticks. So it'll be a octagon at the end. So all these I'm going to line them up so I can get it as close to the middle point as I can. Here's my other stick. So here's the 4 sticks. So we'll mark it at the 12. Okay. And then from here, we'll take the first stick, line it up. I'll get my glue, and then I'm going to put glue at that middle point. This way it allows for it to be measured out and actually make the shape correctly as opposed to it being lopsided on one side. And you can just use like, do it by eyesight. Do another here. Oops. So you want to split these sides as best as you can. And then I'll do the 4th stick, which will be the perpendicular to this here. So yeah, so then here you would let it dry. And I use this board because it's kind of helpful to see how I cut these angles. And so that would dry. And once that's dry, we'll do the next step with the string. Sorry, my hair is like, all right. So I'm gonna show you with it dry. Okay, so here's an example of the glue dry. And then you'll get the string. So I'm using this kind of thin string. And you'll wrap to just reinforce this middle area. Because if the wind, you don't want it to like unglue and then it comes apart. So I just tie a knot here. And then I could cut the piece of string, but I'm just gonna go around twice, then go over here on this side, diagonally here, come over here to this part that I haven't come in. Here. So just trying to get all the areas here. And then I will cut this string. And then this last loop here, I'll just tie it in here. And then like that, it's reinforced. And then from here, we'll use a string to make the outer frame. So I'll tie it to the outer edge of the stick here. Again, I'll make a small knot. And I'm gonna pull it as close as I can to the edge without making the string fall off. So here it's at the, and then I will go to each stick and wrap it around. So wrap it here and again, I'm trying to get as close to the edge, pull it so it's tight and snug. You don't want to pull, you don't want to make it so tight that you like pull the sticks. You want to maintain the form. So just wrap it around. You can reinforce it. You could do it a couple times, maybe tie it if you feel like, or glue it at the end so it doesn't come apart, but it'll stay. Tie that end. And so you do that all the way around till you come to where you started. And here I'll cut the string. And then I'm going to tie it with this other piece here. Okay. So if I wanted a full size of tissue paper, it won't work for this piece because it's too large. So what you can do, and there's varying things, like maybe you want to include 4 colors. You could tape or glue 4 pieces of tissue paper. So here what I did now is I had glued 2 pieces of tissue paper so that I could then, I went around and just cut around the area, and I leave a lip because what we're gonna do is this part is gonna be glued here. So some people glue 4 pieces of tissue paper of different colors if you want to use. And then you would just, again, trace the outside and then cut it. Or you can just straight cut it and just leave, make sure you leave an area here so that we're going to flip it and glue it together. So here we will and we'll just do that all around. So you want to make sure that the tissue paper goes over the string to hold the frame. It also helps to, so that the wind won't break it. And here, there's a little bit here that needs probably more glue to reinforce it. So if you have that, just put some more glue and reinforce it. Sorry, the glue's not coming out here. Okay, there we go. So sometimes they use like rubber cement and stuff, but it's kind of more toxic. So I use this glue. If you have glue sticks, that could work. So maybe you need it over the string because here I'm realizing I'm not putting enough there. So some here just to secure it. And so what you'll have after is this kite like this. And so some elements that happen, you can get tissue paper and fold it And you can make little slits like this, and you can put it onto the edge here as decoration. It's better to glue it from the back. And so you would do it like that. You can cut pieces of tissue long ways like this to then glue it to the side so that you have the fringe coming out, and it also helps more of the air element and really for attracting the ancestral spirits. I'll show you what that would look like if you did it, a couple of different examples. So this one's the use of 3 sticks, and this one I use dowels. So they're a bit thicker. Here you can see and this one I just used the string and just took it all the way to the outside of the end so I didn't have to cut it. And then here's showing the fringe with these parts. And then here with the streamers at the bottom. So this is one example. Another example is this bigger one that's using more geometric shapes, changing colors. Here I did 2, so I just folded it and then made a double fringe here. And then this one is the one I did more on migration. So it's the land, I used the map of California and used some of my photography and some of my artwork. And it's really, this one is about the spirits for those who have passed crossing the border, migrating for a better life. And, you know, I think a lot of times we don't want to move, but we're forced to, whether now we're like climate refugees who are dealing with climate issues and people are forced to move because their homes are being flooded or the ocean is coming in and taking out their homes and the land that they live on. For a lot of Central Americans, it's been civil wars in all of the countries that have experienced civil war, genocide, death, and maybe poverty or kind of things that cause us to move. That happened for my grandmother. She left her children. She had to come to Louisiana. So I have New Orleans, Louisiana here. They were in the South in the 60s at that time. And then moved to California. And so I use this cross in honoring the indigenous people that have lost their lives in the butterfly for migrations. And this one has a lot of fringe. I got really happy with the fringe too. And it's really beautiful because you hear the element of air really like, you know, calling spirit and spirit talking to you, like that element is speaking. And so it's really awesome. You can create anything you want, you know. I have these birds of the different Central American birds, you know, that you could paste. You know, you could do it on plant life. There's so many things that have lost their lives that we need to honor. And so there are ways that we can honor them and use kites, and it's a fun way, and it's very nice and beautiful to do. And there's a woman that says, it's a Mayan like elder who says that when we are flying kites, the string is a symbol of life being flown up into heaven, so that there is contact between the heart of the earth and the heart of heaven. It doesn't represent life of one person, but the lives of many people. And that's by Maria Solis Ash. And she's a Mayan spiritual leader. So, you know, I think there are ways that we can do honor and do it in a fun and creative way to honor our ancestors and the spirits of them. So I guess if there are any questions or any dialogue. Hi, Mio.
Hi. So it's time for our Q&A, and we had some nice comments from people watching. We had someone, Dr. Jessica Varco, is having her class watch this workshop, so that's really great. She's in Porter Ranch, so the students are excited to make some kites, so thank you for watching. And Angela Luna says she loves it. So I actually have some questions that I wanted to ask you about. First of all, I was going to ask you about the shape of the kite, if there's any history behind the actual shape of the kite, because they all have they kind of share this shape.
Yeah, not really. I think, it's interesting because there have been ones that are made like in the shape of a peacock. So I think it's inspired by the form, like whatever people want to express. And also like what's available. So a lot of people, like, they go out to find bamboo and they have to go very far to get these huge bamboo sticks. And some of them have like 20 bamboo poles. So it just depends on like what imagery and what they're trying to create.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. And I was also curious because it's kind of what is interesting about doing cultural events here at Rio Hondo is we have so many different peoples, and our events, sometimes the meaning behind the events are kind of overlapping. So are there any other Mayan or Guatemalan traditions that you've noticed kind of intersect with other cultures, other Latin American cultures, or maybe other cultures from around the world?
Well, I think the kites is one because kites are found all over the world, and like they're used. My stepfather's from Jerusalem, and so kites were used a lot to like competition, or they made them out of newspaper. So that's like in Japan, there's like all these really amazing, I think in kites is one of them. But also I think just in the practice of honoring ancestors and the elements, like that's just universal with the indigenous people from around the world, because, before we had modernization, you had to live off the land. And so paid respect to those things. It was a mutual and, what do you call it? Like it was, oh my God, the word is slipping my mind, but basically it's reciprocal. There it is. It's like, you take only what you need, and you don't want to damage the environment because you need it for something else. And there's no need to waste. And so I think in those indigenous practices, it's really important to like see how they did it, because they were the first environmental rights activists, basically, it's before what we say now. So I think that's really the foundation of it all. And then however that area, because of the geography and what that area informs the community, then it had its own life and kind of looked different, but yeah, I would say.
I mean, it really does intersect with some of the other things that we've covered in our events. So we did bokashi composting, which is all about, motainai, don't be wasteful, use what you have. And so it's kind of, when we scale it back to these big themes, like the cosmos, and there's so many places these things intersect. I think Ofelia Esparza last week, she talked about, people were asking what do you put in your altar and how do you make your own, and she said start with the natural elements, and that's something you're addressing. So I think that's really great.
Yeah. Just to talk on that, like in Mexico they use papel picado, right? So,
yes.
And that is to the wind element as well. So the altars all have those 4 elements are part of it. The fire is the candles. You have water. The earth is like the nature and those things. And then the air, which is the other element. So, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of love that. And, in Asian culture too, you have altars and you have some of those elements as well. And which brings me to another question, which is, you mentioned that after the kites are destroyed, and then I remember you said they were burned, which is similar to like, Japanese culture. We have these arrows that we put over our doorways in the New Year's, and at the end of the year, we burn them. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about like the end of the kites, what happens?
Yeah, so they're taken down, and then they do these huge fires to burn, and then it's like so it's like that death and rebirth, because that's what it is, so something's gonna die, but it has the rebirth of it. And then sometimes they'll use that ash to put into the soil, and then you can plant seeds, and then you have new life growing from it. And I think it's also that nothing's forever, and it's that same concept of like yeah, we do it with all of our love and energy, and then that's the time span of it until the next time, you know. And it's really about living in the, I guess, moment, being present. So that practice is very important to them as well, to show the like death and rebirth. And also with us too, like when we pass away, there's also children who are born, and so it's this constant death and rebirth.
Right, and you have to let go of the kite.
You have to let go of it, till the next time, and what may show up for their next one will be totally different, which is great because it's really like it shows how much of a living tradition it is.
Yeah. Wow, this is really great. I wanted to thank you so much for sharing this with us, and I love bringing in so much of the culture you brought, like Guatemalan culture, Mayan culture, and queer culture, and kind of, you know, included that all in what you do. Do you have any announcements for us that you'd like our audience to know about?
Yeah, so I'm doing an altar at Figueroa and 7th. That will be going up next week. Also, another organization that I work with that is working on displacement and housing in LA, they're doing a community altar at Grand Park. So Grand Park will still have some altars. I guess it'll just be in that social distance kind of way of like, I guess, less altars. But there's also a community altar there that I'll be helping them with. But community is doing the whole planning with that. Yeah, and that's about it. I have a website too if you want to check it out. My name is, it's dalilamendez.com, and you can check it out there. If there are prints, my shop isn't up completely, so there, if you want to print or something, you can send me an email. But yeah, and if you have any more questions, feel free to send me an email through my website. I would love to, yeah, share with you more.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have an announcement for Rio Hondo. So our next event or events are next week. So next week is a big week as we approach Dia de los Muertos. As you know, we kind of finish this series that is kind of around honoring ancestors and preserving culture. We have self-help graphics is coming. We have 3 days of events next week. So we have October 20th and 21st. We have a 2-part lecture series that is all about the topic of Dia de los Muertos and how self-help graphics it has kind of built that tradition in Los Angeles. We have 2 very important legacy artists that they're going to have presenting the history and traditions around Dia de los Muertos. And then on the 3rd day, this is something that you had brought up, Dalila, there's going to be a papel picado workshop. So again, bringing that air element into it. And so there's an artist from Self-Help Graphics who's going to show us all how to make papel picado. So you can add to your ofrenda, you can add some kites, you can add some papel picado, and as we move on, you can learn more and more about this this time. If you want information about these events, you can go to www.riohondo.edu/art and then click on the cultural events calendar where you'll see all of our events that we have. So anyway, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. The video will be posted online so people can watch it and watch it with their classes and their families. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you, Dalila.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.